Hello. Welcome to my first ever live temperature check Periscope. I'm Jeff Lewis, co founder of Bedrock. Today, we're going to check the temperature on COVID 19, Sequoia's now very widely read and widely circulated and widely praised Black Swan media memo that they published yesterday. And finally, I want to talk a little bit more broadly, share a few thoughts about leverage, specifically as leverage relates to both COVID 19 and the Black Swan memo, and finally, fundraising in this environment that we're now entering. But before I check the temperature on these questions, I'm first going to check my own temperature. Bear with me. It's actually the first time I've done this live on Periscope. So everyone going forward, I'll be doing this whenever I do this. If you want to have your home thermometer handy, you too can check your temperature alongside me. Let's see what we got going on here. Might take a minute. Beep by now. 96.8. Okay, I think that's actually slightly below normal. I don't know if we have any doctors watching, but I think that's within the range of normal. So we'll just move on from that. In any case, I encourage you to have one of these home thermometers as well. They're like 20-25 bucks. Really handy to have on hand, and highly recommend everyone own one of these. Moving on, I'd like to check the temperature on COVID-19 and leverage. So one thing that's clear is the virus is actually gaining a fair amount of leverage here in the United States. And it's gaining leverage over our sense of freedom, our sense of our own health, our family's health. It is having an impact on companies, on the economy. And one of the great lessons that I've learned in business and in life that I'd like to share is that when the leverage shifts from one party to another, it always tends to shift far more quickly and far more profoundly than folks realize in the moment. And so, many of you know that I tend to spend a fair amount of my time in New York City. Bedrock, our firm, is headquartered there. And about 2 hours ago, the state of New York, city of New York, I believe, just declared a state of emergency, which means that actually going forward, the government in New York is going to have a lot more leverage day to day over individuals' sort of activities, freedom of movement, than they did in the past. Now, I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm very concerned about coronavirus and have been for months, not for my own personal health, but I'm concerned about the second order effects on society. I'm concerned about folks getting seriously ill and passing away. So I've been very concerned about it. So I'm not saying that the state of emergency is a bad thing, but I am saying that impacts the amount of leverage, the amount of freedom that every New York resident has over their own life. And so if you're someone who actually has the ability to sort of structure your own environment, and you live in New York City, you might want to ask yourself, as I did this morning, waking up in Manhattan, if that's the place that you would like to be if you're going to be quarantined for, say, 14 or 60 days, 14, 30, or 60 days. I know that many of the folks in Wuhan are still quarantined. And if you actually are privileged, blessed enough to have the freedom to leave a highly condensed, often chaotic, even in the best of times, major city like New York, you might want to go ahead and choose to do that, like I did today, meaning I have more time on my hands than usual, so we'll be experimenting with things like Periscope. In any case, another way that leverage might be shifting in this environment is from entrepreneurs to investors. And certainly Sequoia Capital hopes that's what's happening. So yesterday they published an extremely well-written Medium post. It was entitled, something along the lines of the Black Swan event of 2020, basically running through a list of ways that coronavirus is really a huge event that entrepreneurs really need to take heed of. Lots of points in the memo that I agree with. I don't want to rehash those. So I think a lot of big impacts on many startups, on the ecosystem. If you just think logically about a world where people are traveling a lot less, You think about the types of startups that have been working over the last number of years. They're enterprise software startups. Most generally, those are sort of the companies that have gotten the most venture dollars in the United States, the most hype. Certainly, if you aren't really traveling in business, people are working from home, intuitively would think there will be a massive slowdown in enterprise software sales. Conversely, there'll be some businesses that are going to be very positively impacted. Obviously, companies like Zoom, which happens to be in Sequoia's portfolio. So I agree with a lot of their points, but what I don't necessarily agree with is the agenda of the letter. So the agenda of the letter is, of course, not in the letter, and the reality of whenever anyone is giving you advice, as this memo is sort of attempting to do to entrepreneurs, you have to ask yourself, what is the incentive of the person giving me the advice? Like, why are they giving me this advice? Like, what do they stand to get out of giving this to me? And of course, the incentive for any venture capitalist telling you as an entrepreneur that you need to raise capital right away today, or really hunker down, is to try and shift the leverage from entrepreneurs to investors. And as a VC myself, I can tell you firsthand that we've been in an absolutely insane environment where entrepreneurs have so much leverage and investors generally have very little leverage. And it's actually, I'll admit it, it's kind of pathetic. It's been kind of pathetic for the last number of years, how little leverage we collectively as venture capitalists have. There are so many of us. We more often than not think the same way, get excited about the same stuff. I like to think that we're sort of an exception at Bedrock, but maybe that's just me getting high on my own supply or something like that. And in reality, there's been a 10x or so increase in the number of capital on the venture capital asset class over the last 5 or 6 years. And the number of amazing companies actually has not radically increased. And so if you think about the number of companies worth more than $20 billion that have been founded over the past 5 years versus the previous 5 years, there has not been a dramatic increase. Yet the number of dollars flowing into the asset class increase. So net, VCs have not had a lot of leverage, and something's kind of disturbing and screwed up is investors are hoping that there's a sense in which this coronavirus horrible pandemic can help us get some more leverage to invest in companies at more reasonable valuations. Now, I'm not going to lie, I would like that. I would like that to happen. In practice, I actually don't think that COVID-19 is going to have that much of an impact on the fundraising environment. It's going to impact a lot of businesses. It's going to impact a lot of lives. But I don't think it's going to hugely impact the fundraising environment. And here's why. For private companies, for private technology companies, I've always had a rule when it comes to fundraising. I had this when I was a founder myself, like a decade ago, working on Top Guest. I've had this ever since I was a VC, and I've always seen it be true. There's never been an exception to this rule in my own personal experience. And I call it the 0, 1, 100 rule with respect to venture capital term sheets. In my experience, an entrepreneur, no matter how many venture capital firms they talk to, whether it's 1 or 2, 5 to 10, 20 plus, will either emerge from a fundraising process or a set of fundraising discussions with 0 offers to invest, 1 offer to invest, or like tons, everyone wanting to invest. And I use the 0, 1, 100, 100 being sort of euphemistically every firm will want to invest in you. And I don't think that COVID-19 changes that whatsoever. I think we're still in a reality where there's a set of companies that everyone's going to want to invest in. The clearly hot companies that firms like Sequoia tend to often lead rounds in, and credit to them. And those companies are going to have no problem fundraising because there's just so much capital in the asset class. So it's like it needs to get invested somehow. They're the companies that are going to struggle to fundraise in this environment. They probably would have struggled to fundraise in the previous environment, although maybe there's some corner cases where that's less true. Maybe there's sort of renewed interest in certain areas of biotechnology. I feel like remote, video conferencing, remote work enablement tools were sort of a hot sector pre-virus anyway. So those will just be more hot. But there are going to be lots of companies that sort of no one's going to want to invest in. Now, I think where this new environment actually can make a difference for you as an entrepreneur is if you have one investor right now who's leaning in and saying, hey, macro is kind of looking crazy. Maybe you should take some more capital. We'd be up for doing something. Uh, I would say that a big mistake that entrepreneurs often make is thinking that one investor doing that is indicative of the entire market, like wanting to invest. And so if you have one term sheet right now, if you have one investor around the hoop right now, and if you think you might be at risk because of a once in a lifetime, hopefully, I'm afraid it might not be once in a lifetime, but certainly a extremely scary, tragic macro event that's happening right now, and you've got someone willing to offer you money on reasonably good terms, and you think you might be somewhat impacted by this crazy one-off macro event, like I would encourage you to consider the 0-1-100 rule, because it's highly, highly improbable that anyone else is going to surface to give you that money right now. Now, I might be wrong, but that's been my experience. Every single time an entrepreneur had one term sheet, but no others, and thought they could spin up a process to get a lot more interest, it didn't work out. And quite frankly, the same was true for me when I was a founder. We got exactly one term sheet for our Top Guest Series A. It was from Swan. I talked to like 6 other firms behind the scenes, and none of them wanted to invest. And we took the Swan term sheet before it was too late. And now's the moment in time to be thinking about that. And the last point I want to make for today, here on my first ever temperature check, is around leverage that relates to what you can be doing. You being whoever's watching this, I assume that my audience tends to be folks either around my age, sort of mid 30s to younger, meaning given this virus, we know disproportionately impacts older folks with respiratory conditions. If you're someone who's like active on Twitter and watching a Periscope on Saturday afternoon and in my audience, chances are you're in a less at-risk group from actually dying from COVID-19. But because of the like growing awareness curve and the exponential curve that's going on here right now, you actually have a lot of leverage to encourage those people in your life who are more at risk to change their behavior. That could be your parents. It could be people you know who might have respiratory conditions. It could be your grandparents. But now is the time where you have leverage to encourage those in your community, those in your family, to change their behavior. That can be stocking up on medicines, food, social distancing. I believe this is the time, and you right now have leverage to drive some change in those you know who might be more at risk. That's all for today. I'll be back tomorrow with my thermometer for the next temperature check. Now I got to figure out how to turn off Periscope. It's kind of ridiculous that I'm a tech investor and I can't even use this thing. But in any case, see you later, everyone. Be safe, be healthy.